So here's one of the most embarrassing things that happened to me as a kid. When I was 6 years old, I went to a county fair. And like all 6-year-olds at county fairs, I wanted to get my face painted. And at that age, there was only one thing in the world I would want painted on my face: a shark. So when I got to the front of the line, the face painter asked me what I wanted, and I said, a shark. And he said, a what? And I said, a shark. And he said, a what? I said, a shark. And so he, hesitantly painted my face. And it didn't take long for me to realize that something had gone terribly wrong when all the kids started pointing and laughing at me. You see, when I was 6 years old, I had just a little bit of a speech delay. My sh sounded like s, and my r sounded like ah. So when I thought I was asking for a shark, I was actually asking for a sock. Sad but true. And I love telling that story because it highlights one of the most important aspects of storytelling. What does the audience know, and when do they know it? Bad storytellers dump linear information. This happened, this happened, this happened, this happened. Good storytellers are hyper-aware of the flow of information and its relationship to the audience. The logical order of information in my story is that I had a little bit of a speech delay, I asked for a sock instead of a shark, and then I got my face painted. But that's flat and boring. The art of storytelling is holding back and rearranging information. When you're aware of what the audience knows and when they know it, you become a strong storyteller, a creative communicator, and an engaging educator. In this new age of misinformation and the onslaught of AI, it's important that real people who are smart and good at doing things learn how to cut through the noise. Because the noise is getting louder every day. I've spent the last decade competing in the noisiest environment in human history, the internet. I make mind-boggling video illusions, and I bring objects to life through animation. And it's my job. I make scroll-stopping ads for brands. But the core of what I do is tell magical stories. And like all good magic tricks, I obsess over what the audience knows and when they know it. The internet's a lot like digital vaudeville. You get swiped away if you're not communicating clearly and creatively. But how do we do that? We all know the shape of a story: beginning, middle, end. What's lesser talked about is the rhythm of stories. Bad stories are flat. Engaging stories swell up and down like waves. Guide the audience along, take a breath. Guide the audience along, take a breath. 6 years old at a county fair face painting, take a breath. Asked for a shark, a what? Take a breath. Got my face painted, something went terribly wrong, a sock. With every wave, there's a check-in with the audience to make sure you know what you need to know. You're caught up? Great. Let's move on. From that position of clarity, you can add the twists and turns and keep the audience on the edge of their seat wanting to learn more. Now, maybe that sounds like obvious advice to communicate in paragraphs. Once you're aware of it, you start to recognize how the world's greatest storytellers keep you engaged. The next time you're watching a movie, look for the breath. That's a cross dissolve where one shot slowly fades into another. A shot of a city skyline, a cut to the next morning. If you pay attention, those breaths tend to happen every 10 minutes or so. And it's a way to check in, make sure the audience knows what they need to know, and they're ready to move on. And filmmakers can shorten and lengthen those breaths to control the pacing of a movie. And after about an hour or so of this steady rhythm, they can launch into the final thrilling act where the movie builds and builds and the audience starts feeling the tension until finally a release. And that's not accidental. That's how filmmakers carefully manage what the audience knows and when they know it. Now maybe, that's good advice for big stories, once upon a time kind of stuff. But you might be typically communicating a small fact or a bit of research. Well, regardless of how small an idea is, it can be structured like a story to be made more engaging. There you go. Here's one of the shortest videos I've ever made. I wind up, I smack my face, and I turn into snow. Now, is this a story, and what can it tell us about creative communication? To understand how small stories can be, we can look to animation. Animators, to show that a character is thinking and feeling, use a formula. Anticipation, action, and reaction. A cartoon character doesn't simply pick something up. They show they're going to do it, they do it, and they show that they've done it. Anticipation, action, reaction. Beginning, middle, and a story. It's why every pitch in baseball is captivating. The pitcher winds up, you know what's going to happen. They throw the ball. Is it a fastball? Is it a curveball? The batter swings. Did they hit it? Did they miss? A story. So I wind up, anticipation, I smack my face, action, I turn into snow, reaction. Now, this isn't just a way to structure stories. This is an entry point into being creative. Creativity, it's not some mystical quality that some people have and some people don't. In my experience, creativity is allowing yourself room to playfully explore options. In the case of this snow video, the boring first version of it was I wind up, I smack my face, I say ouch. Well, that's flat and boring. Instead, I go on a journey of what ifs. What if instead of saying ouch, I burst into water? What if the table shatters like a sheet of ice? What if I turn into snow? So a rapid-fire creative thought process might look like this. There's a guy who bends his knees, jumps, and lands. Technically a story, kind of boring. What if, instead of jumping, he does a backflip? What if instead of landing perfectly, he slips and falls? Now what if we take the end and switch it with the beginning so that he's walking along, slips and falls, accidentally does a backflip, and miraculously recovers? Okay, now we have something. The assumption is that because I'm creative, I magically pull ideas out of thin air. But I'm actually just going on a journey of what ifs and playfully exploring options. Creativity is an accumulation of decisions. Comedians, musicians, filmmakers, artists, they all start somewhere boring and go on a journey of what ifs. And if you go on that journey of what ifs, we, the audience, get your unique perspective, your surprising insight, and your clarity of seeing solutions, and that's creativity. Now, all this works well if you're a guy who's magically turning into snow. But what about words or ideas? Does anticipation, action, and reaction, does that work if you're not a cartoon character? Well, if you've ever seen an infomercial, you can recognize the same structure. Do you suffer from this problem? Have you tried and failed with these other brands? Well, here's our solution. Anticipate your problem, actions you've taken, reaction, our product. Now, communicating an idea doesn't have to be as heavy-handed as an infomercial, but to be structured like a story to be made more engaging. Scientists have made a breakthrough. Here's what they learned after years of research. This is how it changes treatment forever. Beginning, introduce a knowledge gap. Middle, take us on a journey. What are the actions, the wrong turns? Reaction, where have we ended up? What does it all mean? Now, making 5-second magical videos isn't the only thing I do. It's often the making of, behind the scenes of how I do it that's more popular. But there isn't some ace up the sleeve, smoke and mirrors way as to how I achieve these effects. It's actually really technical and boring. I sit at a computer for days or weeks in manipulating pixels in editing software. But how do we make that more engaging? The rule I work by is teach people who didn't ask to learn. Don't further educate the already educated. Ask, what does the audience know? Assume nothing, and take them on a journey step by step through the information. So in the case of me turning into snow, I can't show editing software because that would assume a knowledge of editing software. Instead, I have to explain it like video layers are physical objects. This layer goes on this layer, that goes on this layer, goes on this layer. Because the people understand that. If you want to reach the most general audience possible, you have to anchor complex explanations to something universal. So to simplify the explanation of how I turn into snow, I have to structure it like a story, dun, 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 and I have to be mindful of how I'm pacing the information and the rhythm. So here's a magical, anticipation. Here's this magical trick, and I'm going to show you how I made it. Action, I actually smacked my face on the table, but I hide that information. I dump snow on the table, and I carefully cut it out and add it to the shot. It looks pretty good as a direct cut, but then I have to go in and add pieces here and there to really smooth it out. And by the way, the only reason I'm wearing a hat is to manipulate your attention across the cut so that you don't see all the mistakes that I left in there. Reaction, here's the trick. Now you understand how the parts make up the whole. And I obsess over this stuff. Structure, rhythm, clear communication. Because in this increasingly distrustful and noisy internet, I value being able to share my work and my story. It's important to me. There are young people who want to do what I do. They want to be on the same path. And AI and search engines can give them a million data points about what that path looks like. But data doesn't move people. Every day, there are smart people with great ideas who lose attention. Not because the ideas aren't good, because they don't know how to guide an audience through them. We're at a crucial point where real people with real ideas and real intelligence and real talent and real information need to cut through the noise. So whether you're entertaining as a digital magician or educating on a bit of research or telling a story or talking about getting a sock painted on your face, you're doing more than dumping information. You're telling a story. Have beginnings, middles, ends. They have anticipation, action, reaction. They have a rhythm to the information, to the pacing of the information. You're taking the audience on a journey from knowing nothing to knowing something. And creative communication is all about how you uniquely choose to guide your audience on that journey. It all starts with one question: what does the audience know, and when do they know it? Thank you.